And I am turning the meeting over now to the Reverend Robert Reed of the American Christian College.
Thank you very much, Colonel Bunker. We're indeed pleased to be here again this year, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be the moderator this evening and to introduce to you our featured speaker, Senator C.R. Lewis. Senator Lewis has been an Alaskan since 1939. He is a Marine engineer, having served in the United States Merchant Marine in World War II. In 1947, he started his own mechanical contracting business. He was elected to the Alaska State Senate in 1966. He was re-elected in 1968 and in 1970. And he's always been either a top or a near top vote getter. He is married to the former Patricia Dunn of Albany, New York, who went to Alaska to be a school teacher. They have 6 children, ranging in age from 2 years to 13 years of age. While in the legislature, he has worked hard for fiscal responsibility on the part of the state of Alaska. He has led the fight against legalized abortion and against a state OSHA bill. Among the important items of legislation that he has introduced or helped sponsor that would be of interest to you include a bill to rescind the approval of the Equal Rights Amendment. He's introduced into the Alaskan legislature the Liberty Amendment, and he's introduced bills establishing a drug unit within the state police department and a bill that would require mandatory sentencing of drug users. Senator Lewis is the chairman of the Anchorage Support Your Local Police Committee. He's a member of the Alaska Nix on OSHA Committee, and he's a life member of the National Rifle Association. He is a life member of the John Birch Society, and in addition serves as a member of the National Council of the John Birch Society. There are many things we could say about Senator Lewis, but among them I would like to tell you tonight, in the meeting I've had with him today, I find that he's a Christian gentleman, he's a patriot, and he's a loyal American, and we're indeed fortunate to have him tonight as our guest speaker, Senator Lewis.
Thank you very much, Reverend. If I'd had a little more time, I'd have written a little better introduction. When I came here yesterday, I happened to meet someone from Ohio, and he learned that I was in the legislature. And the first question he asked me, he said, if you're in the legislature, when you're in the legislature, do you let people know that you belong to the John Birch Society? Well, I let people know, but after hearing Joe Ferguson take after the politicians yesterday, I don't know whether I want to let people know I'm a politician or not. Joe and Otto give me a hard act to follow. It was certainly an inspiring program that they both put on last night. I appreciate it very much. I'm sure everyone that was here did. I do have get a feeling, maybe a complex about the whole thing. I find that everyone I meet here seems to have written, either have written or is writing a book. As far as I know, all the speakers so far are book writers or have written a book. I guess even the people that I managed to sit with in the restaurant, I managed to sit with some book writers there. One, maybe I am getting a complex about it, but one person I was fortunate enough to sit with was Pauline Law, and she's not writing a book. It's kind of anyway, she doesn't have to. She's a beautiful singer. In addition to being a beautiful singer, she sings beautifully. I appreciated my short period at the table with it. Up in Anchorage, where I come from, being a senator really doesn't make you such great shakes. I've been one for 7 years now, and it's pretty well accepted. Nobody ohs and ahs over it anymore, but when I get away from home, get back here on the East Coast, among people such as yourselves, you don't run into a Bircher every day that's a senator, and I get a little attention out of it. And I can't say that I object too much to this, but I ran into one fellow here yesterday that was not overawed by my being a senator. And he said, "You're a senator. What's your ACA rating? You're a senator from Alaska. What's your ACA rating?" And as I understand an ACA rating, I believe it's Americans for Constitutional Action, and they give a rating on how you vote for or against issues that, and the issues that affect the Americans' cause. Well, I really didn't understand what he meant, and I started telling him about the ACA rating of Mike Gravel. He's our senator from Alaska. I don't know how many of you know him, but he's the guy that read the Pentagon Papers at midnight. He's a colleague and cohort of Daniel Ellsberg. And about Ted Stevens, our Republican senator, who ran as a conservative, and then Human Events said after he got elected he did a political striptease act in Congress. His ACA rating, I guess, is about 20. And I could see by his expression that he wasn't satisfied, and then it turned out that his question really was, what is your ACA rating? Oh, we don't have ACA ratings in Alaska, but I'm in the Senate. I'm just rated as the Bircher, simply as the Bircher. And I really feel, in all honesty and sincerity, that's a pretty good rating. I was elected once, the first time, I think in spite of it. I was elected the second time, and that's when I was the top vote getter. I think that was because of it. And I was elected again the third time, number 2 vote getter, and I think the Birch Society, whatever it is, anyway, my identification with it was certainly not a handicap if it was not an asset. There was, in fact, in the last campaign, I'll just mention this in passing, there were 4 seats in my particular district. That meant that 8 of us could run. 8 of us did run, 4 of us were elected, and one candidate on the other slate, the Democrat, I run on the Republican ticket, devoted his entire campaign not to getting elected, but to destroying C.R. Lewis and pointing out the fact that he was a Bircher and that he voted against this good piece of legislation and this piece of progressive legislation. He wound up number 8, and I wound up number 2. And there's another aspect to this being rated a Bircher. I think it'd be worthwhile for you to hear. There's a kid named Leo Shackle ran for the House of Representatives last year, an outspoken Bircher, one of our most enthusiastic and helpful members in the Anchorage area, which means in the Alaska area. And Leo, aside from being qualified as a Bircher, did not have much qualification for being a representative. He'd never been in political or public life before, never been on the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce, never been in the public eye in any way. He's about as inarticulate a man as I could possibly imagine, certainly as inarticulate a man as I ever ran into. I had him on my radio program. Had a hard time getting him to read the script that I wrote for him, but he came the first time out within 39 votes of defeating a 2-time incumbent in a heavily Democratic area. And I'm convinced that it was the Birch Society, his identification with the Birch Society, that served in a large measure to get him the votes that he got. I know that he got political support or financial support that he would not have gotten any other way. It's just the people in Alaska have come to know that much about what the Birch Society represents, and it is getting to be an asset rather than a liability. Now, as I say, some people make over me a little bit when because I'm a senator, and I don't object to that too much, but if it gets to go into my head, I think of what Will Rogers said about senators. It went something like this. He says, "You know, I learned something new this afternoon. I learned that they had senators in Rome. Maybe that's why Rome declined." Well, I think Will Rogers was making a joke. I certainly hope that he was. But The trouble with political jokes is that too often they get elected. So I'd better get to speaking here and say formally good evening to you folks, and greet and thank and congratulate Colonel Bunker and Mrs. McKinley. I guess Colonel Bunker is left to be on the Today Show tomorrow, so he's not with us, but I want to also congratulate and extend my greetings to the others whom I do not know, who I know have worked so hard to make this meeting the outstanding, inspirational meeting that it is. I've tried to put a few meetings together myself, and I know that there's a lot of work goes into them when they do work. This is my first visit here, and I'm certainly impressed with it, and appreciate and am honored, appreciate the opportunity to speak here, and am honored to have been asked. Now, you in the New England Rally for God, Family, and Country, you're much more aware of the problems facing our United States of America than the average citizen is, so I don't think you're going to cut off my head if I tell you that America, the energy crisis in America. Can you all hear me too much or not enough? It's okay. Well, you're not going to cut off my head like they did in China in the old days when they cut off the head of someone that bore bad news. If I tell you that there is an energy crisis in America that has devolved to the point where every one of you, if you've not already been affected, very likely will be affected by this shortage of oil. It's a painful reality that has to be faced and resolved by Americans. You know that, but I think you'll be happy if I can tell you that there is a solution to that problem, and it's my intention to tell you that tonight. Consistent with today's popular practice, I guess I should say that I have some good news and I have some bad news. That's the bad news, that we are facing a real shortage. Whether it's caused or contrived or what it is a real shortage. The good news is that I can bring you a solution to this problem, an alternate to the cold homes, the cold schools, the cold factories, maybe even the empty cupboards. My state, Alaska, can provide that solution to a very significant degree. Your host, Colonel Bunker, asked me to speak on Alaska's economy and ecology. I believe this assignment was given to me because of the interest in our state, which is now prevalent around the country, around the nation, as a result of it being in the news so much these days. He picked the subject, but as far as I'm concerned, he could have picked no subject that is more interesting. And I hope that before the evening is over, I will make it interesting for you too, because the one major factor in our economy, Alaskan economy, which is causing the most trouble, the most stir, that is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, is as relevant to your well-being as it is to mine. Economics and ecology, in my state, they've become, the two terms become almost synonymous. Certainly they're inseparable. In today's real world, one cannot even be considered without giving due weight to the other. The dictionary defines economics as that which affects material resources based on or related to the production, distribution, and consummation of goods, whereas ecology is defined as the interrelationship of organisms and their surroundings. Well, our stock and trade in Alaska is natural resources, and we can't even put foot on a piece of tundra or stick a shovel into the ground or even breathe a liter of air without in some way affecting the organisms and their surroundings. So given today's political climate, you can easily see the Siamese twin relationship of these two subjects. So I'm going to speak to you tonight about our oil-rich North Slope, Prudhoe Bay, where the oil fields lie washed by the Arctic Ocean, and where once we considered it to have a hostile environment, now it has a fragile ecology. I'm going to talk to you about our mountain ranges, or what used to be our mountain ranges, forbidding mountain ranges, which are now our pristine natural beauty, which must be preserved for coming generations. About what used to be 120 million acres of timber and 230 billion board feet of lumber, but they are now our vast virginal forests. Even talk about some of our big game, Alaska's largest carnivore, the Alaska brown bear, and the #1 game trophy of the world, our magnificent Dall sheep, our uncounted polar bear, now all referred to as endangered species. I mention hunting and fishing because it's a small but certainly a significant part of our economy. And based on my 7 years in the legislature, I'm going to try to tell you how government actually works to affect and modify both economics and ecology, and not always for the best. When I mention Alaska, I often get varied responses. To Texans, it means a large area of unknown dimensions, not connected with Texas, and therefore not a serious competitor for their claim to be the largest state in the contiguous states. To the Easterner, it represents a huge landmass inhabited by wild animals and people who like to argue about pipelines. To the conservationist, it is an exciting battleground. Alaska, actually, the word comes from the Eskimo word Alyeska, means the great land, which it certainly and obviously is, 586,000 square miles, 370 million acres. It's between 1/4 and 1/5 the size of the United States. Imposed on the continental United States, it would stretch from coast to coast, from the Canadian border to Florida, Texas, and New Mexico. It would comfortably hold Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, and Nevada combined. As far as Texas is concerned, that mammoth state, whose inhabitants have been known to brag about its size, we could put that in there twice and still have room for a number of respectable New England states. Alaska is huge geographically. It's rich in natural resources. Under normal circumstances, it would be unlimited in opportunity. Within this vast area of 586,000 miles are found all the climatic conditions that you find here in what we call the South 48. Alaska has deserts, great plains, swamps, forests, glaciers, ice fields, fjords, huge river systems, active volcanoes, thousands of islands, broad valleys, the highest peaks of North America. Mount McKinley, you're all familiar with, the highest peak in North America. It has 6 mountain ranges, as many miles of seacoast as the Atlantic and Pacific seaboards combined. Its coasts are washed by 2 oceans and 3 major seas. It spreads over 4 time zones. The worker in Ketchikan in southeastern Alaska can be finishing lunch while his counterpart up in Nome of Robert Service fame is eating breakfast. It contains our farthest west and farthest east territory. The tip of the Aleutian chain is actually so far west that it extends over into the eastern hemisphere. There are actually 4 distinct climates in this vast state, ranging from arid with extreme temperature changes to wet with very narrow temperature changes. You may not realize, I believe few Americans do, that urban Alaskans enjoy a more comfortable year-round climate than do many of you in the South 48, many of the major cities on the East Coast, the Midwest, or the northern tier of the Rocky Mountain states, including my home state, Montana, that's where I was born and raised, and perhaps even including Boston. Probably the most important thing about the factor impressing itself on the desirable climate of Alaska and other desirable features of it is the Japanese current. This warm Pacific stream of water flows northward and eastward beneath the curve of the Aleutian Islands, sweeps up and through the Gulf of Alaska and then south past British Columbia, modifying beneficially the environment of the adjacent landmass. Alaska is now in its 14th year of statehood. It ranks 4th in the growth of states. And in this era of international investment and multi-nation countries, many people are realizing the state's advertising slogan is true. You haven't seen your country until you've seen Alaska. One good look destroys many myths. And only in the far north country, above the Arctic Circle, are found the climatic conditions often ascribed to the entire state. That is, Eskimos, polar bears, walruses, perpetual ice and snow, igloos. These are rarely seen by most Alaskans, and an Arctic tour is as much of an adventure to an Alaskan as it would be to most of you people in the South 48. So what type of people live in Alaska? The same type that live down here. Generally speaking, it may be that we have a younger and somewhat more vigorous population. Our median age is 22.9 years. Travelers continuously express their appreciation and hospitality of the friendliness of the Alaskan people. And while we often hear the words frontier and underdeveloped, the cultural and entertainment aspects are myriad. Plays, musicals, art shows are commonplace. Some of the world's finest concert artists regularly perform in Alaska. Hope we'll see Pauline Law up there one of these days. We're blessed, or cursed as the case may be, with television and motion pictures, same as you are down here. But I think there's little doubt but what we have: the cleanest air, the purest water, and the most incredible, beautiful scenery. The wilderness is just a short distance from any city or any town, including my own. Alaska is still untamed, silent, beautiful, and Alaskans are an outdoor, recreation-oriented people. Flying, boating, hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, canoeing, skiing, skating, swimming. All of these are unsurpassed, and the opportunities are boundless. I don't know, the ratio of airplanes up there is very high. It's 1 to every 100 people. I don't know what it is in the United States, but if it were that high in Boston, I figured out you'd have 27,000 airplanes buzzing around your head. Alaska was discovered in 1741. It was purchased in 1867 by William Henry Seward, Secretary of State under Lincoln and Johnson. He was astute, far-seeing, brilliant man, but he was not considered very astute by the American people at the time of the purchase. The purchase was called, as many of you know, Seward's Folly and Seward's Icebox, but in the face of strong opposition, he did win the necessary approval and bought the land for $7 million from the Tsar of Russia. Then, as I said, he was far-seeing and with a vision that was almost prophetic. He said to the Tsar, I'll give you $200,000 for a warranty deed, for a clear title. Title that's guaranteed against all claims. And he says, if you don't give me a clear title, the deal is off. Well, the Tsar, needless to say, took the other $200,000, gave him a clear title, and we bought Alaska with a clear title, guaranteed against the native land claims issue, which Congress purported to settle in 1971 for over $1 billion cash and 40 million acres of land and unreckonable damage to the United States and to America. Southeast Alaska is located in the same latitude as Scotland and Denmark. It's only 600 miles from the population centers of the Pacific Northwest. It's served by a marine highway. That means a ferry system, state-operated. It's a tourist wonderland, scenic rugged mountains frequently cut by picturesque fjords, cascading glaciers that rise straight from the mountains of the water's edge. The bulk of Alaska's $100 million plus timber products industry is in southeastern Alaska, as is a substantial part of over $100 million fishing industry. We move northward up into south central Alaska, where I live. That's marked by oil fields, gushing black gold, cabbages as big as wash tubs, literally, honestly, strawberries as big as teacups, and lush forests of spruce and birch. It's complex military installations, soaring mountain peaks, protected harbors, and a relatively mild climate, milder than Montana, I'd say. Here is found the state's most productive farmland in the beautiful Matanuska Valley, which lies ringed by the peaks and glaciers of the Talkeetna and Chugach mountain ranges. The two major crops are dairy products and potatoes grown in the fresh, disease-free soil. And here is located Anchorage, my hometown, one of the fastest growing cities in the nation, and rightly called the air crossroads of the world. It serves the European, Orient, and U.S. airlines flying the polar route, as well as domestic and local airlines. It's a distribution center for Alaska, and with well laid out streets, new schools, and commercial buildings, it is one of the most attractive and progressive cities in the nation. Now, when I say that, I'm aware of the school problem. We have the same school problem there that you have in any state that you live in, so I guess I'll say that the school buildings are new and the education is progressive. So In this area, too, is the oil-rich Kenai Peninsula, which, while a small producer compared to our Prudhoe Bay oil fields, has still brought Alaska to a ranking of number 8 in the states as an oil producer and number 1 as the state with the highest production per well of oil. On the Kenai Peninsula, we have our chemical plants which manufacture fertilizer and anhydrous ammonia, and it's here that natural gas is liquefied and shipped to Japan. When you're cold this winter, you can think about that gas going to Japan. Between Anchorage and Prudhoe Bay, which I'm coming to, I'm working my way up to Prudhoe Bay, here's a vast area which includes what we call the interior, western and southwestern Alaska. And here you'll find such places as Igigik, Naknek, Platinum, Russian Mission, Mary's Igloo, Unalakleet, Eek, Pilot Village, Iliamna, and Igiyagi. These places typify the remoteness of Alaska and hint at the spell of the Yukon, the vastness of the land immortalized by Rex Beach and Robert Service. Here is the home of 500,000 caribou, that restless nomad of the north, the uncounted hordes of nesting waterfowl, 1.5 million fur seal, brown, grizzly, and black bear, moose, elk, sheep, goat, walrus, fox, 25 and 30-inch rainbow, raised in cold water and full of fight. Big game hunters come from all over the world to stalk these trophy animals. They are the basis of a hunting and outfitting industry which constitutes a significant and picturesque part of Alaska's economy. Running down, there's points of interest in this land are Nome. You've all heard of Nome, perhaps the best known city in our state. It's the gold rush town, the 10th city of the turn of the century. And Kodiak, one of the largest fish loading ports in America. It's comparable to New Bedford and Gloucester here in New England. So you see, we're not just a land of ice and snow. This brings us up to the Arctic Rim and Prudhoe Bay. Prudhoe Bay and its offspring, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, are of prime interest to you as they are to all of us in Alaska. Before I go into that in greater detail, I want to say something about Alaska economy in general. Alaska is rich in natural resources beyond all knowledge. Modern technology and know-how and the pressure of modern demand make possible, logical, and desirable the development of these resources. So why are we not in the middle of an explosive development in Alaska? Well, that can be answered with one word, and the word is government. The Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, the Environmental Defense Fund, the other environmentalists, aided and abetted by Congress. The Environmental Protection Act and court decisions too numerous to mention are holding up the development of our timber industry. In one case alone, there's a $150 million plant, Champion U.S. Plywood Pulp Mill in southeastern Alaska. It's being blocked and it may never be built as a result of the Sierra Club efforts, aided and abetted by our government, where they are hampering the other two major mills of the $100 million timber industry, requiring that millions of dollars be spent to bring these mills up to meet the demands of the Environmental Protection Act and the OSHA Act, which you heard so much about last night. And the millions that will be spent, 25 million in one plant that I know of, 12 million in another, will not increase production 1 pound from these mills or provide gainful employment for one person. In fishing, Alaska's major industry for years, we see foreign fishing fleets taking millions of pounds of fish out of the sea just a few miles from our major fishing points due to a combination of circumstances attributed directly to government activity. I don't know whether to take the time to tell you about that, but I guess I will. Since World War II ended, the U.S. has followed an active policy of extending economic favors to North Atlantic Treaty nations in exchange for military concessions like port facilities and air bases Specifically, this involves NATO countries starting in eastern Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Denmark, West Germany, and the British Isles in what they call a defense posture against communism. If that isn't a joke to you, it should be. It was devised to keep Russia and her red satellites in check. But stemming from this policy between NATO governments and the U.S. and our government, the U.S. food industry found it economically advantageous to deal with these especially endowed nations for ground fish, chiefly cod, pollock, haddock, ocean perch, and flatfishes like turbot, sole, and flounders. These are the type of fish that are harvested off the Alaska coast by Japanese, Russian, and Korean fishing vessels. The American and Alaskan fishermen do not feel justified in making the capital investment necessary to go into these seas for the bottom fish when their American market is so closely tied to the NATO nations. Agriculture, that's the most basic of all basic industries, especially dairying and slaughterhouses are suffering critically as a result of government regulations and requirements. I might mention here mining. Mining has become almost negligible in Alaska. Negligible, it's a hard word. In Alaska, we do have, however, a mercury mine operating. There's a story that they shipped out 4,000 tons of mercury ore, shipped it to Tacoma to the smelter, and the OSHA inspectors rejected it, made them call it back. Said in this mercury ore they found a trace of tuna. Anyway, land is Alaska's greatest and most obvious asset. Of 586,000 square miles and 375 million acres, less than 1% is in private ownership. Of the 102 million acres granted to Alaska by the Statehood Act, the federal government has actually transferred title to only 6,600,000 acres. Subsequent to the State Act, and I believe in contravention to it, the federal government passed enabling legislation to withdraw 80 million acres of land of its choice and place this land in parks or in something they called wild and scenic river systems. This is in addition to the 40 million acres of land they withdrew from us after the Statehood Act and gave to the natives. This 40 million is given along with $1 billion to some 60,000 Alaskan natives who are full citizens, who've never had reservation status, who have always voted, drawn workman's compensation, drank whiskey, bought whiskey, were full-fledged citizens. Now, as a result of the Native Claims Act, they get $1 billion of our money, 2% override on our oil royalties, and 40 million acres of our choice land. So we come to the subject of oil and gas. That's the major topic of the press these days as far as Alaska is concerned. You hear and read a great deal about the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. There's a great deal of interest in it. I've had a number of inquiries about it from people at this rally. But you hear very little about our Kenai and Cook Inlet basins. I want to mention to you, and I think you'll understand, while Secretary Morton and President Nixon are making long prayers in the marketplace about the need of the country to get the North Slope oil and about our need for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, getting the oil to the people, they have brought suit. Mr. Morton's Department of Interior has appealed a case settled in the U.S. District Court, granting Alaska the jurisdiction over her own territorial waters. It has appealed this decision, and now that means that the lower Cook Inlet Basin, with some 6 million barrels of oil, will not be available for development and shipment of oil. It will be years in the future before the federal government and the state case, before the appeal is settled and before you can get oil, which means to me, and I think to anyone that's knowledgeable, that the federal government is not really concerned about getting oil to you through the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. And I think maybe before the evening's over, I'll show you that they are concerned about keeping that Trans-Alaska Pipeline from being built at this moment. And this is the case in Lower Cook Inlet, where there was no significant pipeline required. Rigs are operating and pumping in the inlet right now. It's a matter of drilling and bringing the oil to the shore, and that's all there is. The environmentalists had nothing to do with it in any way. A clear case of federal government blocking the development of Alaska and extending and aggravating the fuel shortage existing and brought about by their own past policies, whether they were bumbling or deliberate. That case, I wish I had a map here, but the waters that we're talking about is set between the Kenai Peninsula here and the Alaska mainland here. Clearly our waters. Any reasonable, logical person would think of nothing else, but the federal government has said the distance is too great. Those are international waters, so you can't claim them, and we are claiming them. Well, if they were right in their case, they're international waters, that would mean that Russia or England or Saudi Arabia, anybody could come in there and drill just as well as American nationals. So fortunately they lost their case, and if we have a loyal, common sense judge 3 or 4 years from now when it gets settled, well, they'll lose it again. In the meantime, they have held up oil, millions of barrels of oil that could be supplied to your home. Now, you've all heard about Prudhoe Bay and the fabulous oil strike made there in 1968. There remains no question about the oil reserves in Prudhoe Bay. They are estimated as high as 125 billion barrels, and Alaska itself is estimated to contain 600 billion barrels of oil. That's over 20% of the entire nation's supply. If you can imagine 1 billion barrels or 600 billion barrels. 1 million is 10,100,000, and 1 billion is 10,100,000 million. Imagine how many barrels of oil that is. That amount of oil is sitting there ready to be developed if we can get the government and the ecologists off our back. The status of last year, we imported 1.7 million barrels of oil, foreign oil, at a cost and balance of payments of approximately $6 billion. Prudhoe Bay could be pouring right now over 700 million barrels of oil into the United States at a value of $4 a barrel. That translates into $2.8 billion. Nearly one half of our balance of payments could be offset with Prudhoe Bay, which means with the construction of our Trans-Alaska pipeline. Now, the status of this line at present is that Congress must enact a new right-of-way legislation law before construction of any major pipeline across public lands. Prompt adoption of such legislation is required by our overall national interest. For those of you who are not familiar with the court cases, this case was being appealed, and the court refused to hear the case until there is a law enacted giving us 100-foot of right-of-way. They dug up an old 1920 Mineral Leasing Act that said that a pipeline is limited to 54-foot wide right-of-way. That was made in 1920 when they dug ditches with laborers and, dig a ditch, pitch the dirt out with shovel and handled it with horse-drawn slips. It makes about as much sense today as the old no kissing on Sunday laws. They're not enforced. They ask Secretary Morton what made this law so sacred. It's enforced no place else in the country. The rights of way are as wide as they have to be. Well, he said it was sacred because it was an act of Congress. I guess even in the press release there was nothing but guffaws. But it is in our national interest to get the pipeline built right now and see that it is not put in limbo while they study the possibility of sending a pipeline through Canada. The zero-growth environmentalists have now turned their efforts toward blocking the Trans-Alaska pipeline, which would bring this oil to you to heat your homes and fuel your factories, run your automobiles, and their present campaign is for construction of a line through Canada rather than Alaska. They argue that the Trans-Canadian line would be environmentally and economically superior to the Trans-Alaska route, and in view of the recent decision in the pipeline case, it is now quite likely that the pipeline could be built more quickly through Canada than through Alaska. These arguments are not supportable. A Canadian route would not be superior from the environmental point of view. Any pipeline through Canada would involve unavoidable environmental damage, more than the Alaska route. The Canadian route is about 4 times as long. It would affect more wilderness, disrupt more wildlife habitat, cross almost twice as much permafrost, and necessitate use of 3 or 4 times as much gravel dug from the earth. it would obviously use 4 times as much land. It's 4 times as long. It would involve many more crossings of large rivers, which experience proves are a major source of pipeline damage. River crossings present difficult construction problems. The main hazard during the operation comes from floods which scour the river bed and bank, and if large enough, expose the pipe to buffeting from boulders and swift currents, and thence to rupture, and then to oil, of course, in the river. In the case of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, there's only one major river to cross, the Yukon, and we are crossing that with a bridge built especially for that purpose. And I want you, when you're reading newspaper accounts, the frightening tundra damage and caribou drowning in oil, to remember that the pipeline right-of-way will take up 43 square miles. That's in a state of 586,000 square miles. That's less than 1/10,000th of our state's area. It'd be like a very fine thread strung across this floor. In fact, it's like some engineers have compared it to a thread strung across a golf course. So that's what the environmentalists are looking at. The risks involved along the Alaska route are not insurmountable. They can be guarded against. The environmental and technical stipulations that will attach to the Alaska Pipeline permit will assure that this pipeline is designed to withstand the largest earthquake that has ever been experienced in Alaska, and there is no record that I've been able to find of a welded pipeline ever being ruptured by an earthquake. It will be designed and constructed more carefully than many buildings in known earthquake zones, such as Los Angeles and San Francisco. Requirements are that the operation of the maritime leg, that is, the ship transport from Valdez to the west coast, be safer than any other maritime oil transport system now in operation. If our west coast markets don't receive oil from Alaska in U.S. tankers built in U.S. shipyards by U.S. workmen that comply with Coast Guard requirements, the most stringent ever imposed, then the oil will be imported in foreign flag tankers of ancient vintage that are built and operated to much lower standards. Now, if the Trans-Alaska Pipeline does not go through, if you bring it in through Canada and the Midwest, it'll mean that there'll be 26,000 construction jobs for American workers that are lost in Alaska. It'll mean 73,000 man-years of tanker construction work that will be lost, 700 man-years of maritime crew operation and maintenance. But there is an even more compelling reason and arguments for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline over the Canadian line, and that is that Canadian officials have made it clear that there are certain conditions that the government of Canada would impose on any pipeline through Canada. That's a majority of the equity interest in the line would have to be Canadian. The Canadians would own it. And in this connection, a ownership by a Canadian subsidiary of an American oil company would not be acceptable. The management would have to be Canadian. A major portion, at least 50% of the capacity of the line, would have to be reserved for the transportation of Canadian oil, with the primary objective being to carry Canadian oil to Canadians, not the United States markets. And it would mean that whereas the pipeline is designed and capable of carrying 2 million barrels per day, if we go through Canada, only half of that, only 1 million barrels will reach our markets. And we're importing $6 billion worth of oil right now. Every barrel of oil that we don't bring from the North Slope, we'll have to buy outside the United States. At all times, preference would be given to Canadian-owned and Canadian groups during the construction of the project, in construction and in supplying materials. Now, since the meetings with the Canadians on this question, these four requirements have been reiterated many times, and there's never been any public statement, never any indication that the insistence on them would be lessened. In addition to that, we find that the Canadian people themselves are beginning to resent Americanism, or American industry in Canada, American capital in Canada. They call it colonialism. They don't like Americans coming over there, taking their natural resources, bring them over here, manufacturing them, and selling them back to us. They call that colonialism. Beginning to resent Nixon. They say Nixon drinks Canada dry. That reminds me a little bit of TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, that you don't hear much about anymore, but you used to hear a lot about. That was the government's first major incursion into the field of private enterprise down the Tennessee River, where they built Muscle Shoals Dam. Tennessee River ran through 7 states, and the saying was that after the TVA, after Muscle Shoals, that it used to run through 7 states, it used to drain 7 states. Now it still runs through 7 states, but it drains 48 states. Now, it's clear that the Alaska pipeline can be built much more quickly than the Canada line. The companies which own the North Slope oil have not indicated any interest in building a line through Canada. Before an application for a Canadian route could be approved, a number of time-consuming steps would be necessary that have already been accomplished on the Alaska route. Detailed environmental and engineering investigations, including thousands of core holes, would have to be required prior to design. A complex specific project description would have to be developed. Following that, another environmental impact statement on our part of the line and on their part of the line. And I might say that the last environmental impact statement cost the oil companies $12 million. And they've already spent $400 million in getting the Trans-Alaska Pipeline underway. That would have to be, for the most part, thrown overboard. And finally, the task of arranging the financing of Trans-Canada Line would be extremely difficult. It would require legislation on the part of our Congress and their Congress. At the present time, both laws forbid the establishment of such an authority. And the financing, they say that they will have to finance half of it, and the truth is that they just don't have $5 billion. It would cost $10 billion or more, the Canada line, whereas our line is now estimated at $3.5 billion. And time frame is estimated from 10 to 15 years on the Canadian line, whereas estimated at 3 years on the Trans-Alaska line. So there's little, if any, reason to, well, there's no reason, in my mind, no reason that I can see, how any logical, knowledgeable person would urge the construction of a Trans-Alaska pipeline. But there is one reason that's overriding and more compelling than all the others, and that is that oil is the lifeblood of America, of its economy and our country, and the defense of our country. Oil and gas supply 3/4 of the energy used in the United States. In 1970, we consumed 230 billion gallons of petroleum products, 220 billion therms of natural gas. Average consumption per capita is 1,000 gallons per person. But what I want to say is that it takes oil to fuel our battleships and our destroyers. It takes oil to fuel our tanks and our command cars, our fighters and our bombers. Oil, the lack of oil, is a threat to our very existence. Now, some time ago, in fact, the 15th of last month, Arabia, or the Arab nations rather, to dramatize their position in what they think is a coming war with Italy, cut off their oil supplies for 1 hour. We import nearly half of our oil from Arabia. Now, Libya also cut hers off. She didn't get it back on for 24 hours. Some people who are over there say it wasn't that she wanted to be more dramatic than the others, it was just that she couldn't get around to turn it on for another 24 hours. But I know an individual over there, Bunker Hunt, who had large holdings in Libya, and as you may have read in your paper, his holdings were confiscated, nationalized only recently. We cannot have that when our nation is dependent upon it for national security. Now, Canada is no Libya. She is a friendly nation, but there are forces at work to make her unfriendly, and she is a foreign nation. My Senate office has no influence in Canada, nor will Joe Ferguson's congressional seat have if he's elected, and I'm convinced that he will be. None of us vote in Canada, not even the deserters who fled there to avoid the Vietnam conflict and were not returned by our friendly Canadian government. They don't vote there either. So we cannot afford to have Canada or any foreign nation controlling our energy. And I believe that for any foreign official to fail to do his best to develop our own oil supplies and thus decrease and remove our dangerous dependency upon foreign oil borders on treason. That's a strong statement, but I'm glad to hear that you agree with me. I will not make this go too long. I've kind of lost track of my time, but I think I will try to tell you a little bit more about our pipeline and the precautions we have taken to be sure that there is no ecological damage when the pipeline is built. The purpose of the pipeline is to move crude oil produced on the Alaskan North Slope along a route to Valdez, an ice-free port located on the arm of Prince William Sound. From there it will be transported by ocean-going tankers to the west coast. The project will have as its ultimate design a capacity of 2 million barrels per day. There will be almost 800 miles of 48-inch line. There will be 12 pumping stations, 650,000 horsepower per station, 20 million barrels of crude oil storage, and 52 tanks. There will be 5 loading berths at deepwater terminals servicing a fleet of tankers ranging in size from 30,000 to 250,000 deadweight tons. There will be 8 crude oil topping plants manufacturing fuel oil for pumping stations, each with a charge of 10,000 barrels per day. There will be a ballast water treating plant capable of handling up to 800,000 barrels of dirty water, a 25,000 kW power generation plant, several dozen mechanical refrigeration plants which will be used to freeze the ground in Alaska. The amount of technical pre-planning and the extent of environmental studies undertaken in preparation for this project are unprecedented. There's never been anything like it in history. There have been millions spent since its inception on research, engineering, design, planning for the construction and operation of the system. A major portion of these expenditures were almost directly or were aimed directly or indirectly at the matter of oil spill prevention. The economics of the pipeline require great concern for oil spills. Any damage to the line would result in a shutdown of operations and require maintenance procedures which would be costly, and in this respect, good engineering and good conservation coincide. After testing and after startup, the prevention of oil spills will become a prime maintenance and operating objective. The communications system, which will accomplish this objective, will include a microwave system, a satellite backup, an in-plant radio system, mobile radio systems, marine radio systems, navigational aids, and a remote block valve radio system. The microwave system will connect all pump stations, Valdez terminal, remotely controlled valve locations and operating maintenance offices. It will be backed up by a satellite system, and the combine availability should be 99.997%. That's a lot of safety. All stations on the line can be shut down simultaneously in less than 5 minutes. A continuous means of detecting leaks will be by automatic monitoring systems. And it is expected that very small leaks will be found by air patrol, and the entire line will be regularly scheduled ground patrols. Now that's the Alaska portion of the pipeline that we're talking about, or the 2 pipelines in controversy today. I think I'll, at this moment, take you down to Midwest, where they are building a 48-inch pipeline. We sent a representative from our state down there, and he went down and made a report. It's called Canadian Midwest 48-inch Pipeline. He says at present the following additional oil lines have significance. They have been or are being built. Among others, he mentions 124 miles of 48-inch line between Thief River Falls and Carlton, Minnesota. Almost all the pipeline construction in these corridors, which he mentions, on the U.S. side of the corridor are continuing with little or no environmental surveillance by either state or the federal government. The overall impression of this pipeline, he reports, is that the operation shows what can be accomplished by way of good environmental protection with competent operators and contractors. Hopefully the Alaska pipeline will result in cooperation between industry and government of the same quality and environmental consideration, even though the ecological difficulties are of much greater magnitude. During the 3 days that that I spent there observing various aspects of the pipeline construction and operation, I met with the following people. And he names them: Ron Hinn, Vice President, Joyce Western Alaskan Pipeline Company; Don Burley, Project Manager, Lakehead Pipeline Company, and so forth. And the reason I mention these is because I know at least one of these men personally. I know the man that went down there personally. I know that this isn't just something that a promoter for a Trans-Alaska Pipeline has dreamed up. And I might say that this Ron Hinn, I know him personally because he put $2,000 into my campaign. I'm not going to use this platform tonight to announce my candidacy for any public office. Joe Ferguson did last night, and I was certainly glad that he did. And I'm convinced that Joe is going to win the seat that he's after because of the 750 people that he has working for him, not necessarily because of the book that he's writing, and which I told you I was getting a little complex about. But he may win the seat in spite of the book. It'll be because of those 750 people. But I just want to say that even tonight I am not, and I want to make this one thing perfectly clear, I am not going to announce my candidacy for governorship of Alaska. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not doing it. That really wasn't on my platform or in my program or in my prepared remarks or what I thought I might say, but I see Ron Hinn there, my good old contributor, and it triggered that reaction. Anyway, to get on with the environmental considerations of the 48-inch pipeline being built now, he says, our man that we sent down there, the foremost impression of a pipeline of this national scope and impact is that there are no federal inspectors and only a limited number of state inspectors. The contractor sent out notices of steam crossings to the Department of Interior, Corps of Engineers, Coast Guard, Department of Transportation, various state agencies, and so forth. They received no replies whatever. Except from the Corps of Engineers on the Mississippi River crossing, the Corps specified the depth of burial beneath the river bottom. No environmental surveillance as to stream scour, siltation, and so forth was done by any state or federal agencies. No hydraulic analyses were required. During ditching of one 48-inch loop, a minor break occurred on an adjacent line. It was repaired. The only governmental stipulations followed by the contractors of Lakehead Pipeline Company were the DOT regulations concerning pipelines. To their knowledge, they were unaware of Minnesota pipeline regulations. Now then, another interesting facet of the environmental surveillance is that on several occasions, groups of people ranging from carloads to busloads have appeared at the construction sites, taking pictures of all stages of completion. Upon questioning, they would never admit who they were or what they were doing, but insisted on their constitutional right to take pictures. Lakehead personnel believe they are probably amateur conservationists attempting to build a case against the Alaska Pipeline. That's our Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So I don't know how much more I should tell you about this. I want to say that the purpose of these environmentalists in attempting to reroute this line cannot possibly be to conserve our natural resources or preserve our ecology. Their stated goals are zero industrial growth, zero population growth, and zero military growth. The programs of these green freaks, as we call them now, if successfully implemented, would render America helpless in a hostile world. And while one may not be able to state with certainty their motivation and their goal, we can say that any government that cooperates with them and and accedes to their wild demands is thus giving dignity and prestige to a movement which, if unchecked, will destroy America. Such a government must be viewed with suspicion. The state of Alaska has the oil. You in the South 48 need it. We want you to have it. The immediate problem for you and for us is to get it to you and get the Trans-Alaska Pipeline built, transport this oil to you. This can be done if you in this room go to work on your congressmen, on your senators, get your friends and your neighbors across the nation to do the same. I've been in the legislature long enough to tell you that elected officials are persuadable by the public. I could cite many examples of it. I will cite a couple. Last year we had a record-length 161-day session. The public outcry and outrage was so great over that 161-day session that this year we went down and did the same work in 90 days. It was just a result of the vote-conscious politicians being conscious of the displeasure they had incurred from the voting public. Another case, a doctor there, a medical doctor, introduced a bill to outlaw the practice of chiropractic in our state. Well, the public outcry was so great all across the state, so many letters, telegrams, petitions, so forth, that the good doctor withdrew his own bill. He didn't even let it come to vote on the Senate floor. That's what can be done. There was another one called the Christian Science Bill. It said that, in effect, that if a child is sick, you don't have to have a doctor if you get a practitioner, a religious practitioner. Now, I have nothing against Christian Science religion, but I have nothing against little children either, and I oppose that bill. I think that you should have a doctor when your child is sick. But here's the thing, that most of the other senators, most of the other representatives opposed it too. They felt almost exactly as I did. But the Christian Science people, the religion of that faith and persuasion in that state, put on such a campaign with letters and telegrams, wires, petitions, that the legislature passed it, the governor vetoed it, another flood of telegrams, wires, phone calls, petitions, and the legislature passed that, again, over the governor's veto. It required 2/3 vote. Now, I'm telling you that just to show you what people can do. They can still do it. And I have a case here that I think is worth reciting to you, and that is that one person can elect a president and has elected a president. There was a case of Rutherford B. Hayes. He was elected president by one vote in the Electoral College. The count was challenged. It was referred to the Electoral Commission, and he won by one vote. This one vote was cast by a congressman from Indiana who himself was elected by one vote. This one vote was cast for that congressman by a close personal friend who got up from his sick bed and went to the polls. So one person can do something. The ordinary cry is, I'm only one person, what can I do? Well, isn't anybody one person? If one person can elect a president, one person can get that pipeline built. You know, Joan of Arc was only one person. She was 17 years old. She couldn't read or write, yet she changed the course of history. Robert Welch is only one person, and look what he's done. Now, I told you that I had a solution to Alaska's problems, its economy, its ecology, and I have. It's not mysterious, it's positive, it's plain, it's clear, it's undeniable, and it's unquestionable. It has two facets. One is to get men into government who understand the problem in its manifest, palpable form as government, and who have the character, the moral equipment to attack this problem, to solve it by reducing the size and the reach and the extent of government, to make government fulfill its proper role as a protector and not a provider, confining it within the constitutional limits under which the nation grew great, strong, and free. This type of man must be found, elected to office. But there's another facet, and that must be accomplished, must proceed apace like two legs on a same man, and it is of equal importance. In fact, if anything, it is even more equal, and that is that the people themselves must be made to see where the problem lies, what the problem is, and what the solution to the problem is. There must be enough understanding created among the people themselves so that properly qualified, properly oriented, motivated men and women can run and be elected, and once elected, receive the backing and support of the populace so that they can, while in office, do what must be done. That is, reduce the size of government, make it a provider, not a protector, and wrest it from the control of conspiratorial traitors who are using it as a means to impose total government and total control over all Americans and all mankind. This is the answer to the problem. It took me about a minute to say so, but how do we accomplish it? I have no doubt whatever as to how to accomplish it. My 7 years as state senator have brought me to the very settled conclusion of what must be done to elect and support in office constitutional conservatives who can and will return this nation to its turn this nation from its headlong rush into insolvency, surrender, and slavery. And my 7.5 years in the John Birch Society have given me an understanding of the forces which are today silently but brilliantly, seductively, and most effectively working to bring about total government by rewarding politicians who play ball and opposing by every conceivable means those who stand forth rightly for constitutional government. Besides that, my 4 political campaigns, I didn't mention one, I may later, but I have been through 4 political campaigns. They've taught me how woefully uninformed is the electorate, the almost total lack of comprehension on the part of the public of the real forces at work today subverting and destroying America. The political conservatives, of which I am one and have been one all my life, whether Republican or Democrat, I believe lead the field in the field of misunderstanding. They don't understand the problem. So to accomplish the 2 essentials I mentioned a minute ago, that is, elect constitutional conservatives who have the courage, the understanding to act, and to create the understanding among the American people which will guarantee their election and their support subsequently, requires this: the coalescing of pro-American, anti-collectivist, anti-communist groups and individuals into a concerted action body behind leadership which is itself active, positive, competent, and thoroughly knowledgeable. This coalescing must accelerate if Alaska's oil and gas is to reach American markets and heat your homes and power your cars. It must be behind the right leadership. Today, the only organization by virtue of experience, structure, size, reach, and proven competence that can offer that leadership is the John Birch Society. Now, I'm not talking about something I read in one of Mr. Welch's books, although I have the highest regard for his books, and I urge every one of you to read them. But I'm stating conclusions that are based on 7 years of committee work on the Senate floor, campaigning among the people of my state, and among the business and industrial leaders of our nation and my state. I'm prepared to say this unequivocally: if the John Birch Society can quadruple its membership and its effectiveness, you can have Alaska oil and gas to heat your homes, and you'll not have to get your food for yourself and your children by virtue of a ration card or travel in your car only when some commissar gives you permission. In short, you can preserve America as a free and independent nation by quadrupling the membership of the John Birch Society. Now, I believe there are enough men and women attending this rally for God, family, and country to accomplish this. It doesn't mean that you must leave your church, your lodge, your any other patriotic group, only that you must put your effort in a significant amount where it will do the most good. It'll do the most good working in concert with 400,000 others of like persuasion who will work with you in a mighty educational army motivated by love of country, love of family, and love of God. Men and women who share the confidence of George Washington when he said, "I am confident that truth will prevail if the trouble is taken to bring it to light." And men and women who accept the teaching of the greatest of all teachers who said, "The truth shall make you free." And men and women who are determined to bring that truth to the American people. So to those of you who love God, family, and country, and I'm sure that includes all of you, let's put on the whole armor of God and secure on the right as he gives us to see the right. Let's no longer skirmish around the edges or patrol or reconnoiter. Let's get into the thick of the battle. Let's make our efforts actually count. We can rout and defeat the enemies of our nation and our God. If you don't belong to the John Birch Society, I want you to join and get 4 more to join with you. If you are a member, I want you to quadruple your efforts. It's not hard to get 4 members. It's not hard. I've gotten them. Anybody can do it. In these times of America's awakening to danger, it is really not hard. You've just got to go out and do it. And when you go out and do it, you really find that it's rather easy. If the John Birch Society were quadrupled in Alaska, along with the educational inspiration and motivation which would then be provided, they could influence more votes than there are cast in Alaska. That's literally true. I've done the arithmetic on it. There would be more votes influenced by the John Birch Society if we quadrupled our membership than there were cast in the last election. I could be elected governor, senator, anything I wanted to do. So I'm convinced that this is true in most congressional districts in the United States. There's nothing mysterious about that. Go out and quadruple the membership of the society. We all know that love of God, love of family, and love of country requires faith. Faith without works is dead. Someone said, "Show me your faith without your works." You know what the answer was. Let's all show them our faith by our works. Thank you for listening.